So in this section, I'm just going to share with you some key features I've picked up along the way, which have really helped improve my maths teaching. The first of which is the ability just to change the page color on the background. A really simple thing, but it really helps support students who may have visual impairments in your classroom. It just means that they can access the work a little bit better. So this is found underneath the View tab. At the very top, you've got page color. Equally, next to that, if you click on Rule Lines, you have the option of adding in squared paper as a background. And I found this is really helpful in terms of my modelling and also holding students to account in terms of the presentation in their books, because everything that they see on my whiteboard, I should then see reflected in their workbooks. And there's no opt out there. There's no kind of opportunity for them to disagree with that, because it looks exactly the same as what their workbooks look like. And I just found it's really useful in holding them to account. Now, if you're anything like me and you're not very good at drawing diagrams, Microsoft OneNote has partnered with Microsoft Ink some really intuitive tools to help support you here. Now, if I'm teaching something like circle theorems and I go to do an example on the board, typically my circles will look something like that, which isn't great as a diagram if you're trying to explain it to students, and it kind of leaves a bit of room for ambiguity and confusion. Now, if you click on Ink to Shape and I go to do exactly the same thing next to this, it recognizes what I've tried to draw as a circle and turns it into an actual circle for me. And again, it just makes my diagram so much clearer and helps support student understanding a little bit more by removing that confusion from them. Now, there are some really similar things in terms of Microsoft Ink, which are really useful as well. So on the next page, you'll see I've just written an equation there. Now, underneath the Draw tab, you'll see the lasso button, which allows me to select more than one part of the text. So if I was to highlight that entire section, it identifies it as one object and I can move that around the page if needs be. Now on maths, if I click on this part here on the right hand side, you'll see it recognizes what I've written as an equation. And if I click on Ink to Maths, that then converts it from my poor handwriting into an actual piece of text, which I can then rearrange, in terms of changing the font size and the layout, which is really useful. Like I said, if your handwriting is not particularly clear, it's just supporting students to see what it is you want them to do more, or creating worksheets and so on. It's just a really useful tool to have. But on top of that, there's some really powerful functions within this. So if I click on Solve for X, what this does, it then solves the equation I've written, which is really powerful, not only because it's a quick way of checking workings, but also it shows you the steps that you've taken to get there, which is really powerful to support students who maybe need a little bit of additional guidance, or who needs kind of the steps broken down and chunked a bit for them. They can just have that on that right-hand side of the board to help support them. Now, finally, on this part, if you click on Generate a Practice Quiz, what this does is creates a Microsoft Forms quiz, which it automatically inserts into the page. We have questions of a similar ilk, which is really useful, particularly if you've got students working remotely. It's a nice quick way of AFL, but you can see all I did there was click on a button and it created for me, in this case, 3 questions. You can change however many questions you want, but then students have something they can have a go out on, let's say on their mini whiteboards or so, or whatever it is, just to really quickly check their understanding. Now on top of that, let's say I've got this equation this time. Again, I'm going to use the lasso tool to select this. And if I click on Maths, you'll then see if I click on Select an Action again, it's got Graph in 2D. Now, I'm a huge fan of Desmos, but I really like this function as well. So if I click on Graph in 2D, what it does, it plots that as a graph for me. And I can zoom in and out, I can change the axes and so on. And I can include on there some key graph features. So I can include the roots, the intercepts, and so on, the maximum or minimum points. And if I wanted to get more advanced than that, I can. And then I can insert this onto the page and then move that object around. And it's just really useful in terms of modeling to students and showing them visually what it is that you're doing in terms of, in terms of graph work or solving equations, without having to quickly flip between different programs and applications. Now, on top of that, you can then draw over those graphs and those diagrams you've drawn. So let's say you were doing equations and you then saying, okay, how would I solve x squared plus 3x plus 1 equals 10? You could then draw a line over what you've drawn and then talk about the routes and intercepts and so on from there. And it just means that your life is a little bit easier in terms of planning. I've just found this a really useful tool to include, which not many other programs have the capacity to do. Now, finally, before I move on to how I use it in the classroom, this last feature I found is particularly useful as well, in terms of you can print directly from a PDF into OneNote. So here, for example, I've got an exam paper I've just loaded up from Math Genie. And if I go to print and I change the destination, you'll see that it's got OneNote for Windows 10. So if I select that as my printer and click on print, it then should, all being well, ask me for where it wants to go. So I can change it for my work, and I'm going to select on my OneNote CPD part, which I've just created. Click on OK. And now it's inserted that as PDF. So I've got the entire question paper there, and I'm able to then highlight key parts or write over it and so on. It's just a really useful way, particularly if you're going through kind of exam papers and you want to pick out key questions to go through. It's just a really nice way of being able to do that just at the touch of a button without requiring too much work that goes into it. So that's typically some of the key features I've found with OneNote that have really helped my maths practice. Hopefully you found some of those useful. And in the next bit, I'm just going to talk about kind of how I then use this in my classroom.